Erik is CEO at Aprimo, and Aprimo are a leader in content operations and marketing for marketing organizations. Under Erik's leadership, Aprimo leverages generative AI to an exceptional level, I would say, to drive operational efficiency. Aprimo is recognized as a leader by Forrester and many other analyst firms. Erik is a seasoned go-to-market and product-focused CEO. He's a proven track record in the B2B SaaS space. He has a very, very strong operational background. We're very fortunate to have Erik as part of our executive advisory board, and every time we spend time with him, I take away 15 things that I want to go and drive to help make me a better leader. He's an exceptional operator. He's also a trusted advisor serving on many boards of high-growth SaaS organizations and spends a lot of time coaching other CEOs. So with that, I'd like to welcome Erik and Sameera to the stage for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Well, welcome, Erik. One thing that David did not say is Erik is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. No joke, I'm not just saying that. Every time I meet with Erik, I also learn at least 15 things, so this is very, very exciting and a very privileged opportunity for everyone. We met 6 years ago. Deidre and I met you while you were the CEO of TrendKite. So let's go back 6 years, and what problem were you trying to solve then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a multi-time CEO. I've rolled out WorkBoard now 3 times as a CEO, and probably at least that many as a board member. It's in public companies, PE-backed companies, and venture-backed companies. If we go back then, and in all those cases, the real driver, the reason behind it all was driving organizational clarity. So if I go back 6 years ago, I was in a high-growth B2B SaaS company, venture-backed, triple-digit CAGRs for several years, doubling headcount every 6 to 9 months. It was truly an insane environment, and it really came down to Deidre's pyramid of misery or confusion. I forget what she called it. There's just so much going on. The strategy was evolving so much with so many new people, and our strategy sessions, which we ran quarterly with the executive team, had turned into death marches. It was a couple of days of 16 to 18-hour days with the executive team, a third day with the extended leadership team. And I was trying to just figure out what every part of the organization needed to do to just survive the next 90 days. We just finished one of those. It was maybe 2 days later, and I don't even remember what happened. I just saw like a Slack message go by of just like the most absurd decision that I could have imagined coming 2 days after this offsite. So I pulled the CMO into a conference room. I'm like, what the heck are you doing? And then he gave a very thoughtful articulation of why the thing that he had did was the exact right thing for us to be doing. And it was the exact opposite of one of our strategic priorities. And it's funny that Deidre talked about this deep in the organization. This is a CMO, and I go, name for me the 5 strategic initiatives from our offsite 2 days ago. And he got 3 of the 5. Of course, one of the 2 that he didn't get was the thing that he'd gone the opposite direction in. And so it occurred to me, if my CMO wasn't able to retain that information over 48 hours, how was some L4 or 5 person going to have any concept of what they needed to do? And so, our intergalactic, massive Asana mess, just wasn't going to scale anymore. And that's when, I coincidentally, the very next day from that conversation was introduced to WorkBoard, and it was, let's go.
You have one of the most structured operating models, honestly, I've ever seen. What are the key components of your operating model, and how did you go from that intergalactic Asana mess to where you are now, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I really think about it as 5 kind of key components of, for any CEO, your primary job over everything else is to create enterprise value. So you're increasing enterprise value. It's the lens that you view every decision through. And so the question was, how do I build enterprise value in an organization? And there's really 5 things that I do. The first of those is I think about the customer and the journey that they go through from being a nebulous part of my total addressable market to the specific market segments that I support, the ideal customer profiles, the buyer personas or the user personas of my products, through to my marketing funnel and how I make them aware of me and get them to have a conversation with me through my sales process, into what I do post-sales to get them up and running and be successful, through renewal and expansion in a B2B SaaS business model. And I map that and identify each of the discrete phases where value is created. And then I understand what's really the key activities that creates the value in that stage. What's the value? What's the key activities? What are the resources? People, budget dollars, technology that allows me to execute those key activities. And that gives me a framework for value creation. Now, there's a ton more complexity to an organization than that, but if I distill it down, everything should be in support of that. And then I do some very lightweight instrumentation of the business. Obviously, there's an infinite amount of instrumentation you can do, but I focus really on, okay, for each of those discrete phases of value creation, like what's the duration of them? How long does it take to create that value? And how do they convert? How often do people move to the next stage of value creation? And then I look at those key activities and I say, how do I know if we did a good job at executing those vital few activities that create the value? So what's the quality metric? And then for those resources, I think about how efficient did we execute those activities? How many people does it take? What's the capacity that a team has for executing those activities? And that gives me kind of a framework for value creation. And then the third thing I do is I tie that into the financial model of the organization. So the P&L in particular, so that now then I have an assumption-driven model. So now that I know with the organization that we have, using yesterday's weather, this is what we're going to get. And that's important if any of you are familiar with lean manufacturing, value stream mapping. Now all of a sudden, I can identify the bottlenecks in value creation, and I can hypothesize, if I remove that bottleneck, what does that mean to my overall business? So I know what I need to change then. What's the most important thing for me to change in the entire company to create enterprise value? And then the next phase of that operating model is an OKR process. That's the vehicle for marshaling organizational resources to the most important value-creating activities that I can have. And then lastly, it's a cadence of the business. So how do I drive the cycle time of the organization around achieving those change initiatives? And then how do I make sure that they stay front and center so that we don't end up getting to the end of the quarter and it's oh, okay, we didn't make any progress, and avoid the number one issue that you have with change initiatives in general and OKRs in specific, which is people kind of view it as what they do when they finish their day job versus inverting that by integrating it deeply into staff meetings, operations reviews, one-on-ones, and making that be the most important thing that they could spend their time on. And that inversion of the way people think about it, drives the success of the overall change initiative. So you put those 5 things together, you figure out how value is created, you quantify that value through some instrumentation, you integrate that to the financial plan to see if the enterprise value is going to meet your goals. Then you mobilize your change infrastructure, and then you integrate that change infrastructure into the operating rhythm of the company, and you put all those 5 things together, and that gives you kind of the peak operating model for a large swath of company types.
You're clearly so intentional about the operating model and those 5 different elements. How does that ultimately impact performance? And how do you see that play out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, the number one thing that you're trying to drive is organizational clarity. So when you and I hear it a lot in terms of I don't know who to attribute it to. There's this concept called the how-why conundrum. And the how-why conundrum goes something like, if you go to a team and you tell them, take the hill and we'll win the war, they'll say, taking the hill is impossible. How are we ever going to take the hill? And if you go to a team and you say, we're going to flank the hill, we're going to come up behind those ridge lines, we're going to throw grenades in the pillbox, we're going to take the hill, and then they say, that's a complete waste of time. Why would we ever want to take that hill? And so that's kind of like this trade-off that you have organizationally. And so the number one value that it provides is organizational clarity for the organization, and it helps you to focus the resources through the organization. And I think of it in terms of not necessarily the labor at the bottom of that pyramid of confusion, but the decisions. When you think about, my SLT understands what needs to happen, they're going to make it happen. Well, in actuality, me as the CEO, the decisions that I make are meaningless. They're the least important decisions in the entire company. Because if I make a decision, absolutely nothing happens. I can't impact the business in almost any way. When you get all the way to the bottom of the organization, that's 3-4 orders of magnitude more decisions that are getting made, and they actually touch the business. So the other thing that really gets impacted then is the ability to really mobilize the organization towards a strategic outcome.
One of those elements as well is driving transparency across the business. So talk and share a little about what the importance of transparency is like and how that impacts and supports this process. Yeah,
when you think about organizational dysfunction is largely the byproduct of resource contention. Nobody ever has enough to do what they think they need to do. Contention around who gets to make decisions. So one person thinks we ought to do X, the other person thinks that they ought to do Y, and there's ambiguity over is it X or is it Y. Or it's an issue of strategy, what are we going to drive an organization towards, or alignment, and in all of those cases, transparency is the cure, because if I've got an OKR cascade, then everybody kind of knows what the most important thing is, and everybody knows they've decided, they had agency to decide how they were going to contribute to that. And the resource contention gets tamped down because all of a sudden we have cross-team clarity around priorities. So priorities aren't siloed. And so there's, for a large percentage of those, they can get adjudicated at a peer level without running up an org chart in order to make decisions.
How do you ensure that transparency within your team and within the org? Because often what we fear or what we see is, and people fear is, ooh, if someone finds out and someone sees that I'm working on the wrong thing, maybe they'll know that I don't know what I'm working on. I don't know that this contributes to the strategy. I'm making choices day to day. And if someone can now see that, how does that impact my day to day? So how do you ensure the transparency? How do you coach teams to use the data?
Yeah, so I mean, part of that's cultural. You have to have an organization that has intellectual honesty. Like we're all just, we're looking at the data and we're making decisions off the data. And if there's, I love Deidre, she's always lean into the red. If we see something going wrong, that's not an indictment of the team. That's an opportunity for us to improve the chances that our strategy is going to be effective. So, you kind of have to separate. You have to foster a culture where the team feels like they're in the operating room, they're not on the operating table. And even if they did completely screw up, if you have a culture of separating the people from the problem, then you actually end up with really creative solutions. So, it may be that the marketing organization isn't generating enough leads, and we're going to miss our quarterly numbers that we committed to the street. It's a disaster. If you have a culture where you haven't separated the people from the problems, then the sales organization is going to say like, missed my number, and marketing, you suck.
Yeah, or product.
If you separate the team, the people from the problems, then all of a sudden, as a sales organization, I might say like, okay, like I understand, like I'm going to be 10% light from marketing. Can I have my sales organization generate some of their own leads? Like partner organization, can you, fill in part of the gap? So you start to think about like, how can we collaborate around the problem versus how can we fix the person that caused the problem? So, that's, probably the number one element is the cultural shift.
I love that, separating the two. You also are so measured in everything you do in your organization. You have so much data at your fingertips. Some orgs are in different, I would say, phases of the data journey, if you will. They're beginning to instrument the data, and now they're exploring it, and then from instrumenting, we can actually go forward. But your team has a lot of data, and you've always been quite instrumented in that. How do you use that data-driven decision-making to enhance the strategy execution process or make decisions on your strategy day in, day out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say a few things there. And I intentionally, when I talk about instrumenting the business, I basically just called out 5 simple metrics that I was going to go out and find. And I did that just to emphasize that, if you're not a data-driven organization, that's not a multi-year journey to get there. It's a prioritization problem. Relative to your strategy and how value gets created in the organization, and where you need the spotlight in order to see and diagnose what's going wrong. So if I put that aside for a second, one of the chief things that I do, and it also helps with the friction in the organization and a bunch of other things, is role clarity. So every team in the organization, and I use OKRs to do this when I first enter an organization, and I have a culture OKR and they just build on each other over 2 or 3 quarters. Like, I get every team and every individual to understand how they create value. So how does the stack of stuff that they do, what subset of that ladders up and how to the financial model? Because, and you always get a bunch of friction. Somebody inevitably raises their hand and says, well, what I do doesn't ladder up to the financial model. It's the most awkward moment in any all hands is for that one poor person who always asks that question. Because there's always a very pregnant pause, and then everybody in the room realizes the implications of what they just said. Everybody can ladder up to the financial model, trust me. And so I help them to understand, out of everything that they do, what really matters to them, what really creates value. And then how do I measure that? So let's get some, you personally figure out how we can measure that. It might be manual right now. There may be a system we need to tap into. Let's get a BI report going. Let's get it into WorkBoard through an integration so that I can have KPIs to move the needle on it. But then the next thing I ask them is, who's your internal customers? And what do you do that enables them to produce the value that ladders up to the financial plan? And that creates kind of a one-team connective tissue so that when in the tie-off meeting they say, I really need you to do X this quarter, they understand that that's not like a burden that's taking away from their ability to be successful, but that's actually part of how we're going to reach the overall objective. So then how do I measure the value creation for my internal customers? And that gives me kind of that instrumenting the buyer journey, getting role clarity, instrumenting that. And then once you do that, then it's dashboards, right? You have scorecards in WorkBoard for every team. Because now then that's not, are you doing a good job or not? That's, where are we on our journey to be successful, and where do we need to marshal resources in order to help teams be successful? So it inverts the, I'm behind some other team that's like me, so I'm in trouble, I want to hide that, to, no, I've got to raise my hand, because if I raise my hand, I get more resources to make that successful. And you end up inverting the, I'm not going to get punished for pointing out something that's wrong. I'm going to get rewarded for pointing out something that's wrong.
Yeah, this concept of embracing the red and leading into the red, as Deidre says, if you have a culture of watermelon metrics where everything is green on the outside, but you dig into it and it's red on the inside, you're not going to be able to get into those problems and solve them. You'll wait till the end of the quarter and then end up right where you started. Yeah. So it's really awesome how you guys have embraced the data and really have shifted the culture in the organizations that you work at. And
that's how people get fired in my organizations. It's one of my two cardinal rules that I tell all of my direct reports. I tell them, you're going to run your business the way you need to run your business. I'm never going to make any decisions about people or performance, with two exceptions. If you have a manager that doesn't have regular one-on-ones with his direct reports, I'm going to reach into your organization and I'm going to fire that person. And two, if you have anyone in your organization that isn't intellectually honest and misleads the organization about where they are, I'm going to reach into your organization and I'm going to fire that person.
So let's dig. That's good. Got some snaps and claps. Okay, taking one step back from there, not into the firing, but into the cadence of the business and the one-on-ones. You have a really structured operating rhythm in the way that you run your week, your month, your day. Can you speak a little bit about that as well and share what practices you use there?
Yeah, I mean, if particularly for OKRs, and I say OKRs as a proxy for just your strategic change initiatives and your operationalization of strategy, whatever that is in your organization. I think for all of us, it's probably OKRs. But if you don't have those woven into a cadence of the business, then one of two things happens. Like, either you're going to get a lot less done because people are going to wait till the end of the quarter, and they're going to, like, when they see the tie-off meeting, the retrospective, the planning meeting come up on the calendar, they're going to see how much they can get done on their OKRs before that meeting gets there. But worse is, most individuals or team leaders will look at the things that they got done and try to figure out how to, retrofit them into the things that they were supposed to get done. And so the cure for that is to have a very formal cadence of the business, and that drives cycle time, and that drives focus, inverts that kind of the change work is the work, and it drives operational excellence, the amount of your organizational capacity that you can marshal towards the change initiatives. So I'll do that with a set of strategy, first with values and rituals, so people kind of understand how they need to behave in order to have the outcomes we want. And that's things like the one team that we were talking about earlier, or the intellectual honesty that we were talking about earlier. And those are soft things, and the rituals that back those up, like maybe you have some like cute, custom emojis in your Slack that you have, like the little cycle time emoji you put on somebody's comments when they exhibit that. But then you really get into the meat of like the meetings, right? And so it's like the strategy meeting. So I've got an annual offsite where we're going to review our strategy. We're going to look at the previous year, see what risks we've de-risked, what assumptions we validated, the progress we've made against the objectives or metrics that pillar of our strategy can be quantified with. And then, roughly the OKR, the part of the strategy that we're going to bite off for the coming year. And then you have those quarterly offsites. We're going to reset the OKRs and the OKR cascade. Then I'll have a series of operational reviews on a monthly basis. And in those meetings, there's 3 agenda items. First, we're going to look at your OKRs. We're going to see what's amber or red, so what are we behind progress on, medium or low confidence, what we don't think that we're going to make, and then what's the action plan that we're going to take for each one of those. And we're going to do that for a couple levels down in the organization, so that we're popping the hood open and looking at the alignment of the top level OKRs down through that part of the organization. Then there's the one-on-one and team track. So there's a weekly staff meeting for every manager. There's an SLT meeting that's a cross-functional leadership meeting. Same objectives. We're going to look at the OKRs. We're going to look at the KPIs. Then we'll have our standing agenda items as the third most important thing, not the first most important thing, which is, it's very intentional because, as we all know, if we do the ad hoc agenda items first, then the time is filled up with the first agenda item of the ad hoc agenda items and nothing else gets covered. So, we'll do that. And then there's the one-on-ones that take place, and that's where we can really kind of localize the decisions. One of the things that I do that's the absolute most painful thing, everybody hates it, but it's incredibly powerful, is I align the cadence of the business. So the very first meeting that happens, at dark 30 on Monday morning is the ELT meeting. Then that drifts into the global SLT meeting. Then that drifts into L1 staff meetings. Usually then it's the next day, early morning through early afternoon. It's next level down. And so you cascade the staff meetings through the week. And then I invert the one-on-ones. So, IC one-on-ones are early in the week. ELT one-on-ones are late in the week. That sounds insane, but it's actually pretty interesting from a cycle time standpoint and a quality of decision standpoint. So what that means is we make decisions, the most important decisions, the highest level decisions, at the beginning of the week. And those get cascaded down and localized over 2, 3, 4 days globally throughout the organization. At the same time, feedback on decisions, the stupid things that we did, start bubbling up at the beginning of the week and get to the ears of the senior leadership team by the end of the week. So you have, at worst, a 2-week feedback cycle of making a decision to figuring out how dumb the decision was so that you could course correct. And so that gives me like this foundation for an operating rhythm that drives cycle time, operational excellence, data-driven decisions, and quality decisions.
That's awesome. You have incredible experience across 3 different organizations, leveraging WorkBoard, using OKRs as your framework for strategy execution. What are a few learnings to share with this group who are on various stages of their journey? You've seen the journey a few times, so a few key learnings to share.
Yeah. So the biggest ones are probably some of the most obvious. One is go broad and go deep. Go as broad as you can, but most importantly, go as deep as you can, because the rollout of OKRs or strategy, the rollout of tools to support that, like WorkBoard, this isn't like a process. This isn't like a decision support tool for part of the organization. It's actually a cultural transformation for the organization. And it's a strategic execution platform. So if you have an employee somewhere in your organization that doesn't somehow contribute to your strategy, when we're talking about annual budgets, I could give you a few pointers on what you want to do there. So go deep, because otherwise you're going to create friction. Because you're going to have a bunch of people that are aligned. They're marshaling resources behind the most important things. And then you're going to have people either deeper or beside that are competing for the same resources that aren't aligned and have a different set of priorities. So that would be the first one, is make the rollout as broad as you can, as fast as you can. The second is, it's not a rollout. It's a process change and it's a culture change. So the most important thing next to deciding to do that is who you put in charge of it. And so you don't take someone, Jane, the chief of staff, and say, hey, Jane, for the next 3 months, you're going to roll out OKRs. And then on month 4, have Jane go back to her day job. Jane is now going to run the most important process in the company, and it's going to be the most important person in the company for the rest of Jane's tenure. And a lot of people just, they kind of like, okay, a big push, now we've got it, let's move on to the next thing. And this isn't a move on to the next thing. This is the thing that allows you to execute the next thing. And so, it's evergreen and requires the same level of focus, into perpetuity. And, a lot of executives, they view it as a strategic initiative that's, for this quarter or this year, and then, it fades into the background. So that would probably, be the other big learning.
Those are good ones. I would end there, but I'm not going to, because there's so much more to get from you. So a few more questions. What are a few specific capabilities or advantages of using WorkBoard that you couldn't imagine going back to an analog mode, or couldn't imagine running your business without?
Yeah, so the spreadsheet examples are all I just wouldn't do OKRs if I was going to use spreadsheets. The most boring thing is the depth and sophistication of WorkBoard's integrations and the way that they model the KRs. So, the number one thing is reducing friction in the management of KRs and increasing the frequency of updates to OKRs. Because the faster they update, the more decision points you have for optimization along the path. So it's super boring, but that would be kind of the first one. The second one is, and I'll say I hated the capabilities in the beginning, but now then they're they're absolutely the thing I use the most now, which is the integration into the operating rhythm of the business. So here we're talking about things like, the agendas, the one-on-one management. I literally cried just a little tear when I saw the check-in templates. So you could actually help organizations. Okay, here's what an operations review is. Here's what the agenda of a staff meeting ought to be. And you really ought to have this every week. That's our best practice. Make it easy for you. All of those capabilities. The ability to manage action plans. So it's okay, we're in the staff meeting, we're off track on our KR. All right, let's click on the KR. Let's add an action item. Let's give it an owner. Let's give it a due date. And you know what? In 1 week's time, we will have made progress on it, because we're going to be back in this exact same meeting, looking at that exact KR, looking at that exact action item with someone's name on it. And we're going to make progress every week on those action plans. So that would be the second. And I would give it an honorable mention to the AI capabilities for scaling into the organization. So helping managers to have performance conversations. So yes, it should tell you if you should go talk to HR. That's awesome. But most people just don't know how to have performance conversations. It's you were supposed to make 100 calls and you made 50 calls, and you're not going to hit your quota if you don't make 100 calls, and we're not going to hit our financial plan if you don't hit your quota, and people, they're uncomfortable giving feedback. And so being able to craft that. Same for OKRs. The crafting of OKRs is hard for people, and it's, the wordsmithing and tweaking like dominates so much time. Third thing that I would say is the strategy and the canvases. So the strategy gives me linkage. You don't see that other places. Like, I love the feature, like, let me import my deck and have it give me OKRs. You know what I'd rather have? No deck.
Yeah.
And there's like this just ready-made module. It's got the data model of what a strategy is, and it's linked to the OKRs. It's amazing. Same for the canvas. It allows me to get a head start on planning sessions, so that asynchronously, we're coming into the meeting, we've got our retrospective already laid out in large part. Like, we've got all the ideas of what we need to talk about from a strategy standpoint. It's all in there when we walk in the meeting versus, okay, everybody, we're going to take 15 minutes and that you normally have in the offsites.
So one final question for you. Many folks in this audience work for great leaders, and maybe they're thinking, how am I going to get my leader to be more like Erik? What advice would you give to everyone here, and how to go have that conversation with their leader and move more towards the way you operate?
Yeah. Every leader has a different style. We heard that in the last talk. It was, it's spot on. And so the real trick is to go to the leader and ask them what's important to them, and then ask them what's in the way of making that happen. And I guarantee you're going to see what you saw in Deidre's slide, right? You're going to see the complaints of, oh, it's like, I got a great strategy and nobody's doing it, is what they're going to say. And they're going to tell you, oh, we've got to transform the blah business to do X, or, we've got to grow revenue by Y, we've got to expand EBITDA margins by 10%, and we can't get there. And then you have the punchline. This is a way of operationalizing the remedy to your frustrations. So it's like aspirin and Alka-Seltzer in one magic box for the CEO or the business unit leader. And so you can really go in, elevate this from a tactical, this is the process that we're running, to this is the strategic operating system for the leader. And that's the way that I see it. And my SVP of strategy and chief of staff for the business is the most important person in our company as a result of that.
Well, thank you, Erik. That was incredible. I learned, again, 15 new things that I'm going to take away, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So thank you for your time and all your insights.
All right. Thank you, everybody.